The night was supposed to be ordinary. Wine cooling on the kitchen counter, city lights glowing softly beyond the glass walls of their Manhattan apartment. Emily Carter laughed when her husband mentioned divorce, the sound light and dismissive, as if the word itself were a joke. But somewhere between the echo of that laughter and the quiet buzz of her phone, a secret far larger than their marriage had already begun to unravel. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive as an argument, it arrives as a knock on the door. And if stories about love, betrayal, and the dangerous secrets people hide behind perfect lives intrigue you, stay a little longer. There are always more truths waiting behind closed doors. Manhattan looked beautiful at night from 30 floors above the river. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of their apartment, the Hudson shimmered under scattered reflections of city lights, the slow movement of boats cutting thin silver lines across the water. Inside, everything was immaculate. The marble kitchen island, the muted glow of recessed lighting, the quiet hum of the wine refrigerator. Emily Carter stood barefoot near the counter, scrolling through her phone. Her reflection in the glass looked composed, elegant, exactly like the version of herself she presented to the world. Blonde hair tied loosely, silk blouse tucked into tailored trousers. She had just returned from what she told Daniel was a late client dinner. In reality, it had been something else. Across the room, Daniel sat at the dining table with his laptop open, fingers paused above the keyboard. He had been watching her for the past 5 minutes. Not in anger, not even in suspicion, just observing. "You're home late," he said finally. Emily didn't look up immediately. "Client dinner ran long," she replied, tapping one last message before setting the phone face down. Daniel closed his laptop slowly. "Which client?" She raised an eyebrow, amused more than offended. "Since when do you care about my client list?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'm just asking, do you still want to be married to me?" The question floated in the room like a fragile object. Emily blinked once. Then she laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just lightly, like someone reacting to a mildly ridiculous idea. "Is that what this is about?" she said. "You think we're getting divorced?" Daniel didn't smile. "I asked a question." She walked toward the table, swirling the wine slowly in her glass. "Daniel, we have a beautiful apartment, 2 successful careers, and a life most people would kill for." She leaned closer, resting her hand briefly on the table. "You really think I'm going to blow all of that up because we're going through a rough patch?" "You didn't answer the question." Emily straightened and took another sip of wine. "Relax," she said lightly. "There's no need for divorce papers." Daniel watched her quietly. Something about the moment felt final in a way he couldn't explain. She picked up her phone again, glancing at a new message that had just appeared. Her lips curved slightly. Daniel noticed. "What's funny?" he asked. Emily slipped the phone into her pocket. "Nothing," she said. But a few seconds later, she laughed again. Soft, careless, dismissive. And Daniel realized something then. Not with anger, but with a deep, slow certainty. The woman he had married was already gone. What neither of them knew was that in just a few days, a knock would come at their door. And when it did, laughter would be the last thing Emily Carter felt. Morning in Manhattan arrived with a pale gray light that slipped between the towers and into the Carter apartment. Daniel had already been awake for an hour. He stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug Emily had bought years ago during a trip to Portland. The handle had a tiny crack now, something neither of them had bothered to fix or replace. From the bedroom hallway came the soft sound of Emily's alarm. Then silence. Then the faint vibration of her phone. Daniel leaned against the counter, staring at the steam rising from his coffee. A moment later, Emily appeared. Her hair was loosely tied, her silk robe half open over a fitted workout set. She looked fresh, composed, the version of herself she showed the world every day. "Morning," she said, walking toward the refrigerator. Daniel nodded. "Morning." She grabbed a bottle of cold brew instead of the coffee he had made. "Early call?" he asked. "Video meeting with the London team," she replied casually. "Different time zones." Her voice carried the smooth efficiency of someone used to managing dozens of conversations at once. Emily glanced at her phone again. Daniel noticed. Emily sighed softly, like someone already tired of a subject before it even started. "Daniel, I meant what I said," he continued calmly. Her eyes lifted. "For a long time," he said, "I felt like we're living parallel lives in the same apartment." Emily crossed her arms. "That's dramatic." "It's honest." She studied him carefully now. Daniel Carter wasn't known for emotional speeches. If anything, he was known for restraint, which made this moment slightly unusual. "We're busy people," she said. "That's what happens when 2 professionals live in Manhattan." "That's not what I mean." Daniel set his mug down. "You're somewhere else lately," he said quietly, "even when you're standing right here." Emily laughed again, that same soft, dismissive sound from the night before. "You're overthinking things." "Am I?" "Yes." She walked past him, opening a cabinet and pulling out a protein bar. "You work in cybersecurity," she added casually. "Suspicion is literally part of your job description." Daniel watched her unwrap the bar. "You didn't come home until after midnight. I told you why. You checked your phone 5 times in the first minute after waking up. Because I have a job," and you smiled. Emily paused, just for a second. Then she looked up at him. "You're analyzing my facial expressions now?" "I'm paying attention." The air between them tightened slightly. Emily tossed the wrapper into the trash. "Let me guess," she said. "You think I'm having an affair?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched. Then he said quietly, "Are you?" Emily stared at him for 1 second, two. Then the laughter came again, louder this time. "Oh my God, Daniel." She shook her head, amused. "You really went there?" He didn't move. "You're serious," she said, wiping a small tear from the corner of her eye. "You actually think I'm sneaking around like some suburban cliché?" "I asked a question, and I'm answering it." She stepped closer, her voice light but sharp. "No, Daniel, I'm not having an affair." The words hung between them. He studied her face carefully. People often believed lies had obvious tells. Daniel knew better. The best lies were delivered calmly, confidently, exactly like that. "So," Emily continued, grabbing her phone and keys from the counter, "are we done with this little interrogation?" He looked at her. "Not quite." She raised an eyebrow. "What now?" Daniel's voice remained steady. "If this marriage isn't working anymore," he said, "we should talk about divorce." The reaction was immediate. Emily froze. Then she laughed again. Not softly this time, not gently. This was the kind of laughter people used when someone said something absurd. "You?" she said. "Yes, you want a divorce?" "I'm saying we should talk about it." She shook her head slowly, still smiling. "That's not happening." "You're very sure?" "Of course I am." Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. "You know why?" Daniel didn't answer. "Because you don't actually want a divorce," she said. "And how do you know that?" Her smile widened. "Because you're Daniel." She tapped his chest lightly with one finger. Careful, predictable, safe. The word lingered. Safe people don't blow up their lives. She picked up her bag. "Relax," she added, heading toward the door. "We're fine." Daniel watched her walk away. Just before she opened the door, she glanced back. "You worry too much." Then she left. The apartment fell silent again. Daniel stood there for a long moment. Finally, he reached for his laptop. The screen lit up. A folder already sat open. Inside were dozens of files, emails, transaction records, encrypted reports. At the top of the screen was a name, Lucas Bennett. Daniel stared at it quietly, and somewhere far below the building, the city continued moving, unaware that several lives were already drifting towards something none of them could stop. Daniel Carter had always believed that data told the truth people tried to hide. Numbers rarely lied. Patterns rarely appeared without reason. That belief was what had built his career, but it was also what had quietly begun unraveling his life. 2 weeks earlier, Daniel had been sitting in a secure conference room inside a federal contractor's office building in Lower Manhattan. No windows, just a long table, a wall-mounted screen, and the soft hum of a server rack somewhere behind the walls. Across from him sat two men who had introduced themselves only by first name. "Mark," the older one had said. "Ryan," the younger one added. No agency mentioned, no credentials shown. But Daniel had worked in cybersecurity long enough to recognize the tone of the conversation. They were federal. "Let's walk through the anomaly again," Mark had said calmly. Daniel had connected his laptop to the screen. Rows of financial transactions appeared, hundreds of them. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Investment transfers, capital movements between shell corporations, private equity distributions. But Daniel zoomed into the patterns. "That account," he explained, pointing to one line of data. "It appears in 17 separate funds." Ryan frowned. "That's not illegal by itself." "No," Daniel said quietly. He clicked again. "But the timing is." The screen changed. Every transaction occurred within seconds of one another, money moving through a chain of accounts so quickly that the path almost disappeared. Almost. "What are we looking at?" Mark asked. Daniel hesitated. Then he said the word. "Layering." A silence settled in the room. "Money laundering." Ryan leaned forward. "You're sure?" Daniel nodded slowly. "This isn't random," he said. "Someone built an entire financial structure designed to hide the origin of funds." "Who?" Daniel clicked again. A new file opened. The name at the top appeared in bold letters. Lucas Bennett. Ryan exhaled quietly. "Damn." Matt leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel. "You realize what you just walked into?" Daniel already knew. Lucas Bennett wasn't just another wealthy investor. He was everywhere in New York's elite circles. Venture funds, charity boards, startup incubators, political donations. People like Lucas didn't get investigated lightly. "Your report triggered an ongoing inquiry," Mark said carefully. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Ongoing?" he asked. Ryan nodded. "We've been watching Bennett for months." Daniel looked at the data again. The numbers suddenly felt heavier. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Mark didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Your expertise." Daniel understood the unspoken part of that sentence. They wanted him inside the investigation. They wanted the man who had found the digital trail to help follow it. And once he stepped into that world, there was no stepping back out. Across the city, that same evening, Emily Carter stepped out of a black car on the Upper East Side. The building's entrance glowed with soft golden lighting, a quiet doorman opening the glass doors with professional precision. Inside, Lucas Bennett was already waiting at the bar. He looked exactly the way men like him always did, effortlessly confident, perfectly dressed, as if the entire city existed for his convenience. When he saw Emily, his face lit up. "There she is." She smiled. "You're late," he teased. I had meetings. You always do. Lucas signaled the bartender. 2 glasses of Barolo. Emily slid onto the stool beside him. You didn't have to pick somewhere this expensive, she said lightly. Lucas chuckled. Emily, this place is practically casual for my partners. She laughed. The restaurant around them hummed with quiet luxury, low voices, polished silverware, the muted clink of crystal glasses. Lucas leaned slightly closer. You look tired, he said. Work. Or your husband? Emily rolled her eyes. Daniel. What does that mean? She shrugged. He lives inside his head. Lucas studied her for a moment. And you? She smiled faintly. I prefer the real world. Lucas lifted his glass. To the real world. Their glasses touched softly. Emily didn't notice the subtle glance Lucas exchanged with the man seated 2 tables away. She didn't see the brief nod. She didn't know that the man quietly placed cash on the table and left the restaurant minutes later. And she certainly didn't know that several blocks away, inside the federal office building, the screen was already displaying surveillance photos taken earlier that evening. Emily Carter entering the restaurant, Lucas Bennett waiting at the bar, 2 lives moving closer together, and somewhere, behind layers of encrypted files and quiet investigations, Daniel Carter was beginning to understand something terrifying. The truth wasn't just about money. It was about how many people would fall when the truth finally surfaced. It happened on a Thursday evening. Nothing about the day had suggested that anything unusual was coming. Emily Carter arrived home shortly after 6, dropping her bag onto the marble kitchen island and kicking off her heels with a quiet sigh. The city outside was settling into its early evening rhythm, horns echoing faintly from the street below, the distant thrum of traffic along the West Side Highway. Daniel was already home. He sat at the dining table with his laptop open, though the screen had been idle for several minutes. "You're early," Emily said, glancing at him as she poured herself a glass of sparkling water. "Slow day," he replied. She didn't question it. Lately, Daniel's work had become something vague and distant to her. Government contracts, cybersecurity systems, things she rarely asked about anymore. Emily checked her phone. No new messages. Her lips pressed together slightly. Daniel noticed the expression, but said nothing. "How was your day?" she asked absently. "Fine." "Mine was exhausting," she said. 3 meetings, 2 client calls, and my assistant somehow double-booked half my afternoon. Daniel nodded. "Sounds stressful." She leaned against the counter, scrolling through emails. "You know what I need?" she said. "What?" "A vacation." He looked up. "Where?" "Somewhere without cell service." "That would be a challenge for you." She smirked faintly. "You're not wrong." For a moment the apartment felt strangely normal, comfortable, predictable. Then the knock came. 3 firm strikes against the door. Emily frowned. "Were you expecting someone?" Daniel already knew the answer. "No." She walked toward the door, glancing briefly at the hallway mirror before opening it. 2 men stood outside. Dark suits, serious expressions, professional stillness. "Miss Emily Carter?" the older one asked. "Yes?" He reached into his jacket and held up a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Emily blinked. For a moment the words didn't register. "I'm sorry, what?" "We'd like to ask you a few questions," the agent said calmly. Daniel stood slowly from the table. The second agent stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Daniel Carter?" "Yes." "May we come in?" Emily looked back at Daniel, confusion spreading across her face. "What is this about?" Daniel held her gaze for a moment, then he said quietly, "Let them in." The agent stepped inside, closing the door behind them. The apartment suddenly felt smaller. The older agent spoke first. "My name is Special Agent Mark Reynolds. This is Special Agent Ryan Keller." Emily crossed her arms. "Okay, but why are you here?" Reynolds studied her carefully. "We're conducting an investigation involving an individual named Lucas Bennett." Emily's stomach tightened. The name hit the room like a sudden drop in temperature. She laughed lightly, an instinctive reaction. "Lucas? He's an investor." "I work with him sometimes. How well do you know him?" Keller asked. Emily hesitated. "Professionally." Daniel watched her closely. Every word, every pose. Reynolds glanced down at a small folder in his hand. "Miss Carter, we have reason to believe Mr. Bennett's firm may be involved in financial activities currently under federal investigation." Emily's smile disappeared. "That doesn't make any sense." Reynolds didn't react. "We understand you've met with Mr. Bennett several times over the past 2 months. "That's not illegal," she said quickly. "No," Keller replied, "it isn't." Emily's pulse began to rise. "You're making this sound like I did something wrong. We're simply gathering information." Her eyes moved instinctively toward Daniel. He stood near the table, silent, watching. "You knew about this?" she asked suddenly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. The pause was barely noticeable, but Emily felt it. "No," he said carefully. The word landed softly. Reynolds continued speaking. "Miss Carter, have you received any financial transfers from accounts associated with Mr. Bennett?" "No." "Have you assisted him in arranging meetings with investors or business contacts?" I introduced him to a few marketing people," she said. Her voice was less confident now. Keller nodded. "That's helpful." Emily felt something shifting beneath the surface of the conversation. Something she couldn't see clearly yet. "What exactly are you accusing Lucas of?" she asked. Reynolds closed the folder slowly. "At this stage, we're not making accusations." The answer was calm, carefully controlled. But Emily suddenly understood something terrifying. They weren't here because of a rumor. They were here because they already knew things. Her voice dropped. "What kind of investigation is this?" Reynolds met her eyes. "Financial crimes." The room fell silent. Emily looked at Daniel again. He was still standing exactly where he had been before. Quiet, controlled. But something about his expression felt distant now. Almost resigned. In that moment, Emily felt the first cold thread of doubt slip into her chest. Lucas Bennett had always seemed so certain, so powerful, so untouchable. Yet 2 FBI agents were standing in her living room asking questions about him. And Daniel? Daniel looked like a man who had been expecting this knock long before it arrived. The news broke on a Monday morning. Emily Carter was halfway through her commute downtown when the first notification appeared on her phone. She was sitting in the backseat of a rideshare, scrolling through emails, when the alert from a financial news ad flashed across the screen. Federal investigation targets tech investor Lucas Bennett. Emily frowned. She tapped the article. At first, the words didn't feel real. They floated on the screen like someone else's problem. Terms like federal inquiry, suspicious financial transfers, offshore accounts, and multi-million-dollar investment structures. Lucas's name appeared again and again. Her chest tightened. The driver slowed at a traffic light, the early Manhattan rush pressing against the windows. Emily scrolled further. There was a photo of Lucas leaving a building in Midtown, his face tense, surrounded by cameras. Another paragraph mentioned several corporate associates currently being questioned by federal authorities. Emily locked her phone. Her hands had started to shake. No, this couldn't be what it looked like. Lucas had always seemed so confident, so firmly rooted in a world of power and influence. People like him didn't collapse overnight. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Lucas. "Lucas, crazy morning. Don't believe everything you see online." Emily exhaled slowly. She typed back. "Emily, what's going on?" The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. No answer came. The car reached her office building in Soho. Emily stepped out onto the sidewalk, trying to push the tension aside. News stories exaggerated things all the time. Federal investigations took years. Sometimes they never even resulted in charges. She walked into the lobby, the polished floors reflecting the sharp morning light. The receptionist greeted her with a quick smile. "Morning, Emily." "Morning," but something about the atmosphere felt slightly off. When she stepped into the elevator, 2 junior associates were already inside. Their conversation stopped the moment she entered. Emily pressed the button for the marketing floor. The silence lingered. One of them glanced at her phone, then quickly looked away. Emily felt a flicker of irritation. Paranoia, she told herself, nothing more. But when the elevator doors opened and she stepped into the office, she saw the same expression repeated across several faces. Quiet curiosity, subtle tension. Her assistant, Lauren, approached her desk quickly. "Emily," she said softly. "What?" Lauren hesitated. "There's something you should probably see." Emily set her back down. "What is it?" Lauren turned the monitor toward her. Another news article, this one from a business publication. The headline was worse. "FBI expands investigation into Bennett Capital, corporate connections under review." Emily's stomach dropped. "What does that have to do with me?" she asked sharply. Lauren said nothing. Instead, she scrolled down. Halfway through the article was a section titled Key Professional Relationships. Emily's name appeared in the third paragraph. Emily Carter, a senior marketing strategist in Manhattan, reportedly assisted Bennett in arranging several meetings with venture partners and brand consultants over the past year. The words blurred slightly. "I didn't assist anything," Emily muttered. "I introduced him to people. That's normal business." Lauren nodded quickly. "I know." But the damage had already begun. By mid-afternoon, Emily had received 3 emails from colleagues asking cautious questions. By 4 o'clock, her department director asked to touch base privately. By 5, 2 clients postponed scheduled meetings. Emily sat at her desk, staring at the screen long after the office began emptying. Outside the windows, the city darkened into evening. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Lucas. "Lucas, things are getting messy. Lay low for a few days." Emily stared at the words. Lay low, as if she had done something wrong. As if her life wasn't already beginning to tilt beneath her feet. Across the city, Daniel Carter sat alone in the dim light of the apartment living room, a news broadcast playing quietly on the television. Lucas Bennett's face appeared on the screen again. The anchor spoke calmly about federal investigators examining complex financial networks. Daniel muted the sound. He leaned back slowly. The investigation had finally surfaced in public. He had known this moment would come. Still, seeing it unfold felt heavier than he expected. His phone vibrated on the coffee table. A message from Emily. "Emily, did you see the news?" Daniel looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed a single reply. "Daniel, yes." Across Manhattan, 2 people sat in separate rooms watching the same story unravel, and neither of them yet understood how much worse it was about to become. The apartment felt colder than usual. Not physically. The thermostat still held the room at the same quiet, controlled temperature, but something in the air had changed over the past few days. The silence between Emily and Daniel had become heavier. Emily stood near the window, staring down at the traffic moving along the West Side Highway. The city lights blurred against the glass as another ambulance passed somewhere below. Her phone lay on the kitchen counter behind her, face down, muted. For the first time in weeks, Lucas hadn't responded to her messages, or anyone else's. Behind her, Daniel sat at the dining table, reading something on his laptop. Emily turned suddenly. "Did you know?" Daniel looked up. "Know what?" She walked toward the table, her voice tight. "About Lucas." He held her gaze for a moment. "I knew there was an investigation." Emily laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "An investigation?" "Yes. You said nothing." Daniel closed his laptop slowly. "What would you have wanted me to say?" She stared at him as if the answer were obvious. That the man I was seeing might be under federal investigation. The words landed hard in the quiet room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. "You just admitted it." Emily froze. "What?" "You said the man you were seeing." Her breath caught. "That's not what I meant." "Emily." His voice was calm. Too calm. "You don't have to keep pretending." She turned away, rubbing her temples. "This isn't about that." "Isn't it?" Her shoulders stiffened. "You let this happen." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "You knew something was wrong," she said, turning back towards him, "and you just stood there and watched." "I didn't watch." "You did nothing." He studied her face, the anger, the fear underneath it. "I did my job," he said quietly. Emily blinked. "What?" Daniel stood up slowly. "My job," he repeated, "is to analyze digital systems, financial networks, data structures." She felt a strange unease crawl through her chest. "What are you saying?" Daniel walked toward the window. Outside, the city glowed with its usual restless energy. "A few months ago," he said, "I noticed irregular transaction patterns connected to a group of venture funds." Emily didn't move. The accounts were linked to Lucas Bennett's firm. Her stomach tightened. "You're lying." "I wish I was." She shook her head. "No, no, that's not possible." Daniel turned to face her. "The investigation was already happening when I discovered the data trail." Emily felt her pulse begin to race. "And you just joined it?" "I cooperated." The word echoed in the room. Emily stared at him as the meaning settled in. "You helped them," she whispered. "I helped identify a financial crime. You helped destroy him." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. He destroyed himself. Emily laughed bitterly. "You're unbelievable." "How? You let me walk straight into that," she said, pointing toward the television where news coverage had been playing all week. "You knew I was seeing him." "I suspected, and you said nothing." "What would you have done if I had?" Daniel asked. The question caught her off guard. "What? If I had told you the man you were involved with was under investigation," he said calmly, "would you have believed me?" Emily opened her mouth, then closed it again. Daniel's voice softened. "You laughed when I mentioned divorce." Her chest tightened. "You made it very clear you didn't take me seriously." "That's not, Emily." The quiet way he said her name stopped her. "For months," he continued, "I watched you drift further away from me. You were texting him, meeting him, smiling at messages that had nothing to do with our life." She looked down at the floor. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." "I know." The word surprised her. Daniel ran a hand slowly through his hair. "But the truth is, we stopped choosing each other a long time ago." Emily's eyes stung. "So this is it?" she asked quietly. "You exposed Lucas, ruined my reputation, and now you get to act morally superior?" Daniel shook his head. "This was never about winning." "Then what was it about?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Truth." The word hung between them, heavy, final. Emily turned away again, staring at the city lights that once felt like symbols of everything she wanted. Now they just looked distant, cold. "You could have told me," she whispered. Daniel didn't answer right away. "Finally," he said softly, "you stopped listening a long time ago." Neither of them spoke after that. And in the silence, something inside the marriage quietly broke for the last time. 3 weeks after the scandal broke, Emily Carter sat inside a quiet federal office building in Lower Manhattan. The room looked deliberately ordinary. Gray walls, a rectangular table, 2 chairs facing each other beneath a fluorescent light that hummed faintly above them. Emily's hands rested on the table, fingers interlocked so tightly her knuckles had begun to pale. Across from her sat Special Agent Mark Reynolds. A digital recorder lay between them. Neither of them had turned it on yet. "Would you like some water?" Reynolds asked. Emily shook her head. "No." Her voice sounded unfamiliar to her, thin, tired. The past few weeks had erased the polished confidence she once carried into every room. News outlets had continued publishing stories about Lucas Bennett's financial empire, each article revealing another layer of deception. Share companies, offshore accounts, millions of dollars moving through invisible channels. And woven through several of those stories had been a smaller, quieter thread. Her name. Reynolds folded his hands calmly. "Miss Carter, we're not here to accuse you of anything." Emily let out a soft laugh. "That's not what the internet thinks. Public speculation and federal investigations are 2 different things. Are they? Reynolds didn't respond. Emily looked down at the table. I introduced Lucas to people, she said slowly. Investors, consultants, marketing partners. She lifted her eyes again. That's all I did. We understand that, but those introductions are now part of your case. Reynolds finally reached forward and turned on the recorder. This conversation is voluntary, he said evenly. You're free to stop at any time. Emily nodded faintly. He began asking questions. Dates, meetings, emails. Each detail felt small when she remembered it. Another networking dinner, another introduction made over cocktails, another business card exchanged across polished tables. At the time, it had felt like opportunity, access, momentum. Now it looked like something else entirely. How often did you meet Lucas Bennett privately? Reynolds asked. Emily hesitated. Several times. Did he ever discuss the structure of his investment funds with you? No. Did he ever ask you to facilitate financial transfers? No. Reynolds studied her carefully. Did he ever offer you money in exchange for arranging meetings? Emily shook her head immediately. Never. That part, at least, was true. Lucas had never needed to offer money. What he offered instead had been far more seductive. Influence, belonging, the feeling of stepping into rooms where powerful decisions were made. Emily realized now how easily she had mistaken proximity to power for real security. Reynolds turned off the recorder after another half hour. That's helpful, he said. Emily exhaled slowly. So what happens now? Reynolds leaned back slightly. That depends on how cooperative you continue to be. She nodded. Her career was already unraveling. 2 major clients had severed ties with her firm, and the company had quietly placed her on indefinite leave. LinkedIn messages from colleagues had grown increasingly cautious. Friends who once invited her to private dinners now sent polite texts instead. Distance had replaced admiration. Emily stared at the blank table. Is Lucas in custody? She asked quietly. Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Yes. The word settled heavily in the room. When? She asked. 4 days ago. Emily blinked. Lucas had stopped responding to her messages 5 days earlier. The realization landed slowly. He didn't call me, she murmured. Reynolds watched her without judgment. Emily laughed softly, but the sound cracked halfway through. Of course he didn't. For months, she had believed Lucas Bennett represented something extraordinary. A doorway into a world larger and brighter than the quiet life she had built with Daniel. Now she saw the truth with painful clarity. Lucas had never invited her into that world. He had simply passed through her life while building something else entirely. Something illegal. Something dangerous. And when it collapsed, he vanished without a word. Emily left the federal building just as the evening sun dipped behind the skyline. The air felt colder than she expected. Across the river, Manhattan glowed in fading gold light. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the city move around her. Taxis, commuters, strangers rushing toward lives that still made sense. For the first time in months, Emily felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. Not anger, not fear. Regret. Because the hardest truth wasn't that Lucas had lied. The hardest truth was that she had wanted to believe him, and in doing so, she had mistaken ambition for love. 6 months later, Manhattan looked exactly the same. The skyline still shimmered at sunset. The streets still carried the same restless energy of taxis, hurried footsteps, and flashing traffic lights. But Emily Carter no longer felt like she belonged to that version of the city. Her new apartment sat 12 floors above a quieter street in Brooklyn. Smaller, simpler, no marble kitchen island, no sweeping river views, no floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected a perfect version of her life. Just a modest living room, a narrow balcony, and the distant hum of the subway passing every few minutes. Emily stood at the window, holding a mug of tea. The news cycle had moved on months ago. New scandals had replaced Lucas Bennett's downfall. New headlines had taken over the financial pages. But traces of the story still lived online. Articles archived, old photos circulating, her name occasionally appearing in quiet footnotes of the investigation. Emily had eventually cooperated fully with federal authorities. The investigators confirmed what she had insisted from the beginning. She hadn't knowingly participated in any financial crimes. But the damage to her career had already settled in place. Her former firm had allowed her to resign voluntarily. Most companies in Manhattan's marketing world suddenly had no openings that matched her experience. Reputation, she learned, rarely collapsed with a loud sound. It simply faded. Like invitations that stopped arriving. Like emails that went unanswered. Emily set the mug down and opened her laptop on the small dining table. The screen lit up with a simple document she had been working on for weeks. A consulting proposal. A smaller life, smaller clients, smaller expectations, but honest. For a moment she stared at the blank section beneath the heading. Her mind drifted somewhere else. Back to a different apartment, a different evening. Wine on the kitchen counter, city lights reflecting through tall windows. And Daniel, standing quietly at the dining table, asking a question she had dismissed too easily. Do you still want to be married to me? Emily closed her eyes briefly. The memory felt sharper now than it had at the time, especially the sound that followed, her laughter. She hadn't meant it cruelly, at least that's what she used to tell herself, but it had carried something worse, certainty. Certainty that nothing in her life could truly collapse. She had believed she understood the world she lived in. She She had believed she understood Daniel. Both assumptions had been wrong. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. An email notification. Emily opened it slowly. The sender's name made her pause. Daniel Carter. The subject line was simple. Divorce finalized. She opened the message. There was no bitterness in the text, no accusation, no long explanation, just a short, carefully written note confirming that the legal process had been completed. At the bottom, one final line. I hope you find the life you're looking for. Emily stared at the words for a long time. She tried to imagine where Daniel was now. Still in Manhattan, probably. Still working quietly behind screens and encrypted networks, solving problems that most people never even noticed. Daniel had always been good at disappearing into his work. But now she understood something she hadn't before. He hadn't been weak. He had simply been patient enough to see the truth when it arrived. Emily closed the laptop and stepped out onto the small balcony. Across the river, Manhattan glowed in the distance. Beautiful, untouchable. For the first time, she didn't feel drawn back toward it. The wind moved softly through the quiet Brooklyn street below. Emily leaned against the railing, listening to the distant sound of a train passing underground. And in the silence, one memory returned more clearly than all the others. Her laughter. That brief, careless moment when Daniel had spoken the truth, and she had treated it like a joke. She understood now that some sounds didn't disappear with time. Some echoes followed you. Long after the life you once believed in had already fallen apart.